When did you realize that you were actually dating an idiot? He literally could not boil water. He offered to make some tea for my mom and me. When I eventually entered the kitchen, it smelled like gas because he took the electric kettle, the kind that sits on a base on the counter and plugs into the wall, put it on the gas stove, and then turned on the gas without igniting the flame, which honestly, thank God. But I was speechless. Story 2. He did a lot of things. I knew he wasn't exactly a genius, but some of the stuff he did seemed just willfully stupid, like refusing to turn off the engine while getting gas, or having a loose collection of axes in his cab just sitting in a pile, waiting to become deadly projectiles in a crash, which he thought I was ridiculous for pointing out as a hazard, or packing unboxed glassware in the trunk in a way that it definitely would have broken without me intervening to give it some padding, and then telling me, if it breaks, oh well, I'll deal with it, as if leaving it to fate and accepting a pile of broken glass was more reasonable than taking simple preventative measures. Or when he raked leaves and also raked up all the landscaping bark at my rental, which I then had to replace out of pocket. Or the time I asked him to shovel snow, and he shoveled it into a massive pile on the driveway. Or the times, yes plural, when he fully stopped his car in the middle of his lane because someone was tailgating him. One of those times was on a completely blind turn on a mountain pass, and he was trying to wave the offending car across double yellow lines to pass him, with me shouting, "What are you doing? He can't pull into oncoming traffic right in front of a blind turn. You need to keep going until there is a shoulder to let him pass safely." And he still thought I was being an unreasonable nag, until 2 seconds later, several cars came flying around the corner. Yeah, I don't miss the constant emotional and physical workload of having to always stop him from doing insanely stupid stuff, or else having to do damage control afterward. Story 3. He said DNA testing doesn't exist, and that 23andMe was just guessing where my ancestors came from. He also claimed the flat earthers had some good points. My personal favorite was when he, a church-going Christian, said the Bible tells people to stay in their own country and not flee widespread violence. Why in the world did I date that guy? Story 4. Once I took a new girlfriend to my favorite Chinese restaurant. I was on good terms with the manager, always got the best table, and often had dessert comped. Service was 5 stars. I steered a lot of business his way. So I start dating this new woman. I thought she was cool. She sits down and immediately starts throwing out racist slurs. When the waiter comes over, she orders in her best mock fake sing-song Chinese accent. The guy was cool, but as he walked away, she made Chinese eyes at him, pulling her eyes back in full view of my manager friend. I was mortified. I asked, "What the hell is wrong with you?" She replied something I won't repeat, but loud enough and racist enough for the entire restaurant to hear. I had no idea she was a flaming racist. I went to pay the bill and the manager could barely contain his anger. I told her to wait outside while I apologized profusely, explained the situation, and made it clear I would never bring her back. He didn't accept any of it. The next date I brought there, he sat us right next to the bathroom. The waiters ignored us and no desserts were comped. The message was clear: don't come back. With anyone. It was that bad. Story 5. His grandma died and left him $2,000. He came home overjoyed and couldn't wait to tell me his plans for this life-changing money. His plan was to buy a dilapidated bar in a non-walkable, run-down part of town and fix it up. He intended to sleep on an air mattress in the equally dilapidated apartment above the bar while he worked on it. He would then run the bar and be a huge success. He worked full-time at a warehouse 45 minutes away. We lived together at the time. He had never even worked in a bar or restaurant. He had no construction experience, and all the tools we owned for household projects were mine. But he had friends who were handy and would help him. I talked him through the logistics of basically moving out and sleeping on a cot in a barely livable apartment for months or even years while he fixed up the bar, and what it would mean for our relationship. I talked about the stress and headaches of running a bar, based on what I had seen in my 15 years working as a server and bartender in the restaurant industry. I talked about the cost of permits, licenses, and stocking the bar with supplies. I talked about marketing and profit margins. He decided not to do it. Then years later, when we were divorcing, his sister and mom berated me for killing his dream of opening his own bar and crushing his spirit. They were just as dumb as he was, and they thought it was a perfect idea, blaming me for years for not letting him do it. Story 6. During the last presidential election, I was excited for him to vote for the first time because he had become a citizen. He made a big deal about registering to vote and was excited when our ballots arrived in the mail. We had never discussed politics in depth because English isn't his first language, but from the brief talks we had had, it seemed like he was progressive. So we went to get lunch and then sat down at our kitchen table to vote together. He asked me who I was voting for, and I was honest. I told him Harris. He then proceeded to demean me and rant for a solid 10 minutes. When he paused, I asked if he was voting for Trump, and he told me of course he was, because he was a man living his dream. He was powerful, rich, and living his dream because he was married to a Russian woman. He told me Trump was the most educated man to save America. It was honestly embarrassing to realize I was engaged to a misogynist, uneducated, and slightly abusive individual who couldn't hold a constructive conversation. I laughed at him, and he ripped up his ballot and threw it at me. After 3 years together and having a baby, I realized I didn't know him at all. Story 7. He told me he wanted to move out of his mom's home, where he only had to pay a little rent, into an apartment at least as big as hers, which had 3 bedrooms, as a single person with no money, no resources, and a broken car. I really tried to ask him to reconsider, but no, he was determined. I asked what would happen if it didn't work out, which realistically it couldn't, and he told me I didn't trust him enough, and that I should just let him do it, even if it all came crashing down. He even mentioned he might ask his messy sister to move in with him. He also felt threatened that I was getting my motorcycle license. As soon as I told him I had started the process, he said, "Oh yeah, I might do that too, since it's always been my dream." Again, no money, and he had never mentioned this being his dream before. And then he cheated on me and expected me to just forgive him, claiming it just happened. He said he couldn't even say no, she suddenly had her hand on him, or something like that. Story 8. She stole my Christmas gift from her family and our friends. Her excuse: "If you can't handle me at my worst, you don't deserve me at my best." I never trusted her completely after that, even after trying to build trust with exercises and therapy. She caused additional damage throughout the relationship, and eventually I couldn't see myself with her. We had been friends for decades, and this part of her I had never seen. The backstory: we went to a Chinese restaurant for Christmas dinner with her parents and several of our friends. I got up to go to the bathroom and had paid for everyone, though I didn't know I had been caught. They all contributed to an envelope of cash and stuffed it in my camera bag. The next morning, a friend called excitedly to ask how I liked their gift. I checked the bag, and there was no gift. Story 9. Not me, but during university, literally in the university, the boyfriend of a girl I knew once said to me and another friend while we were playing chess, "Chess is a pointless game. It's a game of nothing but random moves." Instead of explaining, I just said, "Yeah, but I bet I could play 10 games against you and easily win every time." Oddly, he agreed. Another time, he asked me what degree I was taking and I said, "Computer science." He then went on to brag about why I would go to university just to learn how to turn on and operate a computer. Sigh. Granted, this guy also used to wear a plastic fire helmet out in public. I even once questioned him on it, and he literally quoted a villain from a cartoon: "If they're talking about you, they'll never forget you." I called him out on the spot, and everyone around, including him, went silent. To be fair, I started to question my friend who was dating him when she once asked, "Why are some of the lines on the road either yellow or white?" Immediately followed by, "How come some of the green lights flash and some don't at intersections?" I truly started questioning university admission standards after that. Story 10. His mom's brother was trying to have a son and was making his wife give birth to multiple children for this purpose. I heard this and I was shocked. I expressed how terrible this is, and he said, and I quote, "They have a business to manage, a son is necessary." I asked him why he thinks a daughter is not capable of doing the same, and when he realized I wasn't on his side, he said to save himself, "Oh, but she isn't really interested, Mind you, these girls were young, and they didn't know what they wanted. I made a face and asked him what made him think the son wouldn't be passionate enough to want something else in life instead of joining their business. He didn't have an answer. He just said, "Oh, I never thought of that." Not only was he dumb, but also an a-hole. Story 11. He wanted to go to a show of his favorite band on tour. When he opened the website, it said North America Tour. He came to me upset, saying he couldn't go. We live in Canada, so I said, yeah, they usually have fewer Canadian stops, but they might have something in Ontario or Quebec. He looked at me baffled and said, no, they're not coming to Canada, only North America. I spent a while trying to explain that North America includes Canada, the United States, and Mexico, but I could never shift his idea that North America meant just the northern part of the US. He also thought Asia was in Korea. Glad I'm out of that. Story 12. She wanted to celebrate getting her boating license by taking her father's speedboat from Los Angeles, California to Hawaii. When asked about the distance, she said they could just pack some sandwiches. I like to think she's still floating out there in the middle of the Pacific. Story 13. When I moved in with my girlfriend, we agreed that I would pay 1/3 of the utility bill since she had a teenager living with her who also used a lot of power and water. A couple of months later, she asked me to check her portion of the bill. I said it was about $150. She asked how I remembered that, and I told her mine was $75 and hers would always be double mine. She completely lost it, insisting that I was supposed to pay 1/3 of the bill and that she was paying 75%. She literally couldn't grasp that 2/3 is double 1/3. It took me almost an hour to explain it in a way she could understand, starting with, I pay for one person, she pays for two, two is double one. Not one of her finest moments. Story 14. I ended up dating someone who was idiot adjacent. During junior year of high school, I went overseas and visited Germany, Denmark, France, Belgium, Sweden, and Norway. When I got back, I visited my girlfriend, her twin sister, and their father. The father asked where I had gone, and after I listed the countries, the sister said in a very confused voice, "I thought you went to Europe." The father looked at me and said I was dating the smart one. The twin also had no idea that pipes were hollow. She thought they were solid. Edit, I don't want to call her an idiot. She was a sweet girl, just better at sports than school. Story 15. This was probably 15 years ago, when manual cars were still common. I drove a manual car, and one of the first times I drove her around, she kept saying, "Why are you doing that?" I was confused, trying to guess what she meant, until she pointed at the gearbox every time I shifted gears. She said, "Stop doing that, it's annoying. Just drive normally." I was honestly speechless, trying to explain the difference between a manual and an automatic car. After that, she wanted me to teach her to drive like I do, but in her automatic car. I had to explain why that wasn't possible. I don't think she ever understood it. Now that I think about it, Story 16. She kept using the microwave to store food and would frequently get food poisoning. At first, I assumed she just reheated food and forgot about it, but no, she literally thought a microwave worked like a refrigerator because they had the same logo on it. GE. I was with this girl for 2.5 years. Every single moment of her life felt like an extinction-level event, and we spent most of our time at Deacon 1. I assumed she had some sort of anxiety disorder. Lots of people do. It's not the end of the world. Anxiety medicine is generally a sedative, and sedatives can make your brain not work so well. About a year into our relationship, I encouraged her to get serious therapy. She came back with a diagnosis of intellectual developmental disorder, IDD. I couldn't believe it, so I got more involved, took her for a second opinion, and made sure to screen for dyslexia, ADHD, and ASD. No, this poor woman had survived 21 years of her life with an IQ lower than the average room temperature, and it had never been caught as a child. For her, every day was an extinction-level event. Survival mode 24/7. The good news is that with support, we were able to get her up to about an 8th grade education before she decided to strike out on her own. It gave me a lot of perspective on what average intelligence really means and why the world works the way it does. Nearly a quarter of people genuinely lack the ability to form a critical thought and navigate life almost entirely by instinct. Edit. The answer to many questions is that I'm autistic. I ended up with her because she had nowhere else to go, and I had spare rooms with no reason to say no. Neither of us would have chosen the other naturally. I'm a fat, older, autistic man, and she was a young, Kardashian-styled Insta-clone. Her brother, who was my best friend for a while, unceremoniously dumped her on me because she was extra as hell, as the kids would say. I see now that "was with" implies a girlfriend, but she was more like a daughter, or a non-venomous spider I let live in the corner of the room. We were never romantic, and I spent most of my time avoiding her by working overtime. She had problems. I enjoyed solving problems. Story 17. I was 18, dating a 24-year-old university student. Red flag, I know. One of our assignments involved watching a documentary about how geneticists traced the origins of the human species back to Africa. At the time, my boyfriend didn't believe it. He thought all races evolved independently, and by some miracle were genetically similar enough to reproduce with one another and have the same internal anatomy. He was Asian, I am white, and he genuinely thought we were different species. Story 18. I went grocery shopping to make dinner with my then boyfriend. I was planning the meal, so I asked him to keep an eye out for a whole chicken. I wanted to make Jamie Oliver's chicken and milk. Awful name, but it tastes amazing. He looked at me like I was the idiot and said, babe, they don't make whole chickens. You can't buy one chicken. They only sell the breasts and thighs separately. I've only ever seen that. Needless to say, the relationship didn't last long. Story 19. We were walking with my side of the family, and at a busy intersection, the light turned red while cars whizzed by. She proceeded to walk across the street anyway. My uncle said, "Hey, be careful, it's a red light," and she snapped, "I know my rights." She explained that, as a pedestrian, she believed she always had the right of way, and that cars must stop for her at every intersection. Glad we didn't have kids together. Story 20. Boyfriend number 1. Got into a heated argument with me for over an hour at the Texas State Fair because I tried to show him the way to the food court. I'd been there before. This enraged him because he claimed the fair had never been held there before, so clearly I was lying. I guess he thought it was a coincidence we were standing in Fair Park and imagined they hauled big techs and the giant Ferris wheel around the state every year. Boyfriend number 2. Remember that internet hoax where people claimed a broom could stand up straight because of the moon's alignment? He was totally convinced it was true. When I tried to explain the science didn't make sense, and even showed him NASA's post debunking it, he called me a bot and told me to stop being so closed-minded like a bot from the Matrix. Boyfriend number 3 did not even remotely believe me when I said the president is the head of the executive branch. He insisted the president isn't part of any branch and is totally separate, above all three. When I tried to use Andrew Jackson as an example, He called me stupid and claimed the Supreme Court has a military to enforce its rulings. Story 21. My ex, when he got COVID in the military, lost his sense of taste and smell for so long that he dropped a lot of weight. He started smoking weed just to be able to eat again, obviously without anyone knowing. He had a doctor's appointment and explained what he was doing. The doctor understood and agreed since it was medically justified. Later, he randomly tested and was called to a disciplinary hearing where you're supposed to submit documents or explain yourself. I told him to get a letter from his doctor detailing their visit and what was said, so he wouldn't get a dishonorable discharge. I remember him literally saying he wasn't going to do that. He was just going to let the dishonorable discharge happen. Story 22. And it was our first date. Previously, we had only talked online. We agreed to meet at 5 o'clock. I drove to her town, which was about an hour away, and at around 5:10, she texted me saying she was running a little late. She kept sending similar messages until about 6:30, and we finally met at around 6:45. I asked her what had happened. She explained that she had bought a house. The closing had been at 4:45, so she thought meeting me at 5 would give her plenty of time. She figured 5 minutes should be enough to pick up the keys. Story 23. When I was 19, my father was a senior vice president at a huge company. He got my girlfriend a job at a fleet distribution center as a title work processor. Within a few weeks, they moved her to license plate processing. Then she was moved to scheduling people to pick up their cars. And finally, she was assigned as a porter. They didn't want to fire her, so they kept moving her to roles with decreasing responsibilities, hoping to find a job that would suit her skill set. Each move also placed her farther away from the senior managers. After she totaled 2 cars while moving them from the parking lot to the prep bay, they put her on security at the gate checking badges, literally as far away from the building as possible. Story 24. He mocked a woman on a bicycle because of her big legs and hips. The windows were up, so she couldn't hear him, but I could. And in that moment, I realized I was sleeping in a bed every night and sharing finances with a man who sneered at women just for minding their own business in public, while not even being attractive enough to him. And he felt completely comfortable doing it in front of me. He didn't even think to keep that small bit of ugliness to himself. He just let it hang out in front of me like it was fine. I tolerated a lot of messed up things between that moment and the end, but that incident never stopped haunting me. Story 25. The first time was when she showed me her bedroom, and I noticed her bookshelf. There were some fantasy novels and 6 or 7 leather-bound Ernest Hemingway books that were part of a set. I asked if she liked Hemingway, since all the girls in my English class hated him for the way he wrote about women, manly activities, drinking, and so on. She said, "Oh, I haven't read those yet. I got most of them in a school giveaway, but not the whole set. I don't want to start a series in the middle." I was a little taken aback, but you don't know what you don't know, so I gently explained that Hemingway didn't write these as a series. Each book is a self-contained story with different characters. They only look like a set because they were reprinted as a collection. She said, "Well, I'd still rather start at the beginning of the series." She could read, but she mostly read young adult books with growing numbers of volumes. I didn't think she was dumb yet, but I was a little surprised at how incurious her mind seemed. Did she really think all fiction came in series form? Story 26. When she told me she believed in essay exceptions to abortion bans. You have to believe in bans to believe in exceptions. This was in Texas in 2024. I'm not from there, and had just moved in August 2023. She's a lifelong Texan who voted in the election for the abortion ban back during the first Trump administration, or whenever that was. Since Texas politicians have famously bragged about refusing all exceptions, I immediately asked her if Texas had the exceptions she believed in. I knew it didn't, even though I'm not from there, and since she didn't sound upset when she said she believed in exceptions, I strongly suspected she had no idea, despite living there her whole life and having voted for it herself. As soon as I asked, she went quiet, long enough that I could tell she didn't know. She hesitated before finally admitting it. Then I said, "Don't you think you should know if the ban you voted for has the exceptions you believe in?" She told me that was condescending, and I didn't even know where to start explaining that it can't be condescending if you are in fact exactly as uninformed as it suggested. Story 27. My ex, whom I dated for just a few months, had parents who sent him money to take me out on a nice date. He blew the money on movie rentals and other things for himself. I didn't even know his parents had given him money for that, except he told me one day when he decided to treat me to Burger King. It started with, "I'm glad I'm not dating some high-maintenance chick. You're the type that appreciates anything you get." "What do you mean?" Then he added, "Oh, my parents told me to take you out on a date, but I know you're happy keeping it low-key. Plus, I got to use the money for things we need." He never saw the breakup coming. Complete shock. He even wrote a several-page diatribe explaining why I was making a mistake. Last I heard, he had turned himself into something of a red pill influencer with a small following, according to his brother, who is completely embarrassed by the whole thing. Story 28. I worked in sales with 2 locations in our area and a third about 20 minutes away. My boss managed all 3 locations and was 20 minutes away when he texted the group chat asking if my coworker and I had heard from the other location that day. The person there was alone and hadn't joined the district call 20 minutes earlier. As my coworkers were texting our boss back, I got a call from my best friend. Apparently there had been a violent shooting at the other location's parking lot. Once we got all the information, I snuck out for a smoke and called my boyfriend at the time to tell him what had happened. His response? So because there was a shooting at your location, you want to ban all guns? I hung up and ghosted someone for the first and only time. My whole family shops in that center weekly, and they had been there that day. It was a traffic incident gone wrong, an accidental cutoff that led to a death. I just wanted to process it with someone. Damn. Story 29. We were watching some found footage movie on Netflix about inner city gangs. It was clearly a fictional drama with professional camera quality. This was around 2013, so phone cameras weren't that good yet. The framing always used the rule of thirds to the point it got kind of silly. At one point, my then girlfriend turned to me and said, "I love this movie because it's all real," or something to that effect. I literally didn't know how to respond, as nobody in their right mind could think this movie was real. We spent the next who knows how long looking through IMDb so I could show her how movies are made with actors and all that. Story 30. Met this girl at the park while playing with my kids. We went to her house a couple of times, gave her money to make us dinner, etc. One day, I went to her house and opened her fridge. Nothing was in it. She had a little boy and no food in the fridge. I said, "Hey, I'll stock your fridge for you so you can have some food. That way you can eat good." She said, "Nope." She wanted a purse instead. I was like, "What the hell? You have a child, your fridge is empty," she said. "Nah, I really want the purse." We argued about it. I left and she called me the next day. I thought she was going to accept the food. "Nope," she said. "I want what I want and I want the purse." That was the last time I spoke to her. I call her Purse Girl. One thing I hate is a woman who doesn't take care of her kids. Story 31. My child's mother, then girlfriend, was extremely upset with our daughter in the kitchen and just seemed fed up with life. I walked in and asked what was going on. Now, mind you, my daughter had this horrible habit of putting anything and everything into water. This time, she got a step stool, took a bunch of magnets off the fridge and submerged them in water. After asking what all the commotion was about, she showed me the cup of magnets and said, "Look at what your daughter did. Now we have to throw all these away." I was puzzled and asked why. She said, "She got the magnets wet, so now they work." I had to demonstrate that they still worked because she didn't believe me. Honestly, it was the funniest thing ever. Story 32. We went to the history museum on a date. There was a huge dinosaur skeleton. She turns to me and says, "Weird how they don't put real bones in a history museum." I thought she was referring to the fact that museums sometimes use replicas to preserve the originals or fill in missing parts of the skeleton, but then she followed it with, like, why put mythological creatures on display? Everyone knows dinosaurs weren't real. They proved it in Jurassic Park. I didn't have any words. Story 33. When I was 30, I was dating a guy who was 34. I showed him a drawing of an ovary that was on the front of a greeting card. When I asked him if he knew what it was, he said, "Is that a bicycle seat?" When I told him no and explained what it actually was, he made this disgusted face at me. In that moment, I knew he did not deserve to be dating women. He's probably close to 47 now and married to someone likely 17 to 20 years younger. They married after only 9 or 10 months of knowing each other. I'm not shocked. That poor young woman is now trapped with a moron. Story 34. I told my ex that I was going to dig clams and needed a shellfish license. She was shocked both that I needed a license and that clams just grew in the wild like that. Then she asked if she needed a license to pick blackberries, and I was completely lost for a minute. I kid you not, she thought clams were vegetables. Her favorite food was clam chowder, and she thought clams were a vegetable. Like a potato, she said. Story 35. An old professor reached out to me via text to ask how I was doing. My mother had died of cancer a few months prior, so I told my girlfriend at the time how nice it was that they reached out. She got incredibly upset and asked why the professor hadn't asked how she was doing. We had both taken classes from the same professor. I just said I didn't know. Then she said she hoped that professor died of cancer, fully aware that my mom had just passed from cancer. It made me mad, and she couldn't understand why it made me cry. She doubled down, saying she'd had a friend die from cancer, and so what? That completely killed any love I had for her, and rightfully so. Good ride. Story 36. He needed to renew his passport, but grown-up things were like pulling teeth with him. I did all the legwork, filled out the application for him. I told him he just needed to write in his social security number and sign the form. He mailed the form in. A few weeks later, he got the form returned. No social security number and no signature. And he was upset with me, even though I had given him explicit instructions to his face. So I put little stickies on the form for the two things he absolutely had to do: social security number and signature. He mailed the form in again. A few weeks later, another letter arrived. He still hadn't signed it. We were together for so long, and he was an idiot the entire time. He's done many more terrible things, but damn, this was one of the absolute dumbest. Story 37. She graduated with a 4.2 GPA from university and was going to grad school. Very book smart. We went on a trip to Costa Rica, and our phones died, so we stopped in a shop to find out the time. She asked the time. The lady pointed at the clock. She asked again, and the lady huffed and pointed at it once more. I told her the time was right there, 3:30. She snapped at me. I know that. That's when I realized she couldn't tell time on an analog clock. I created a whole lesson plan with a test and everything to teach her this basic skill. After studying for 2 hours and taking a test designed for a 7-year-old, she got 3 out of 20 questions correct. I wouldn't have laughed if she hadn't constantly used her GPA to lord her intelligence over other people. Story 38. We were on an early date at a sushi restaurant, and he ordered edamame to start. When it arrived, he started eating the entire pod instead of popping out the beans. The waitress and I were both taken aback and tried to explain how to eat them, but he insisted that was the way he liked it. The waitress warned him it was too much fiber, but he doubled down and ate them all like that. Yes, we continued dating, and I should have run even before that moment. Story 39. One day, I went over to her townhome and her roommates were standing on the front step. I asked what was going on, and they said the door was jammed and they couldn't get inside. It turned out my ex had ordered so many Amazon packages that they completely filled the front lobby, and she had just left them there. Once we finally got the door open, we counted 30 to 40 packages. She also used to get completely drunk and fall down the stairs. Her townhome had 4 floors, count the stairs. After the 6th time, I gave up on the situationship and moved on. I hope she's alive and well, but I have my doubts. Story 40. Long ago, I dated a girl for about 3 years. It was fairly serious and we got along great. But a big red flag for me came early on when we watched 2001. She'd never seen it, and I'm a huge movie person. After the Dawn of Man sequence with the apes, she paused the movie, looking confused. I asked what was confusing, and she said she didn't understand what was happening. I explained that it was showing the moment apes began using tools, which then cuts to the spaceship to show how far we've evolved. She just said, "Oh, I don't believe in evolution." She was from a pretty religious household. As an atheist, deeply interested in science and reason, I knew it would never be a long-term relationship. Story 41. We lived together for a year. At some point I realized I was living with a teenager, not a partner. She put a metal fork in the microwave twice. The first time, I explained why it was dangerous. The second time, she said, "I thought that rule was more like a suggestion." She failed an important job interview because she stayed up all night gaming, then blamed bad luck. She once drove on the highway with an empty fuel tank even after 3 warnings from the car, and was surprised when it stopped. She gave our Wi-Fi password to a random neighbor because he seemed nice, then wondered why the internet was slow and the bills were higher. She told a personal secret of mine to a friend as a joke and didn't understand why I was angry. I realized I was dating an idiot when I noticed I spent more time cleaning up after her choices than building anything together. I felt like a tired parent, not a partner. Story 42. She was a medical doctor and had attended many births. She had talked about overweight mothers and said that if she were pregnant, I should tell her if she was gaining weight and getting fat. I said I would never tell a pregnant woman that she was getting fat. She replied that she had explicitly told me to do so it would be fine. I knew her well enough to know she absolutely would not be fine if I said that, but she was so sure she could keep her emotions together while pregnant, when in reality I would never say that to her even under normal circumstances. Story 43. Borrowed my car one day to pick up a bunch of empty alcohol bottles so he could smash them somewhere or throw them into a quarry. We were 19 and 20 at the time, so having that in our possession was questionable, let alone in my car and on my insurance, which he wasn't covered under. He came home after doing it but didn't mention a thing, and we decided to go eat. A few minutes into the drive, I heard the bottles rattling and blew my lid. We turned back to dump them. I yelled at him to clean out the trunk, and he started by picking up one bottle and walking it all the way to the dumpster, probably about 300 feet. I almost started crying. I was so frustrated. I told him to stop, got into the car, and drove it down to the dumpster myself because it was easier. He was always kind of dumb, but goddamn, that was the cherry on top. I don't think the breakup was long after that. Story 44. Geography came up in conversation, and she didn't know there were 7 continents. Then she couldn't name any of them. After that, she couldn't even name our own country, the one we live in, without answering with a question mark like she wasn't sure if she was right. That was in the late 1980s. Today, she's a flat earther and conspiracy theorist. I'm not joking. And this isn't AI. Story 45. She didn't understand how space and planets worked. She just mentioned it one day when we were looking at the stars, I think. It's strange to realize that something so foundational can be completely missing from someone else's knowledge. I also realized it can be tricky to explain something you've known since you were 5 and now take for granted. I started by talking about how the planets in our solar system, like Earth and Mars, all orbit the sun, which is a star. Maybe I was still trying to give her the benefit of the doubt, but honestly, she didn't seem to have any mental image of it at all. Orbiting didn't make sense to her, and I don't think she knew what a solar system actually was, although she knew there were 9 planets in ours. And isn't one of them not a planet anymore? She asked. I remember she thought it was funny that Earth went around the sun and not the other way around. And maybe I'm remembering this wrong, but I think she was surprised that the sun is bigger than Earth. I feel like she thought it was about the same size as the moon. At that point, it became challenging to explain it with words in a way she could actually conceptualize. I guess I could have pulled up a picture on my phone, maybe I did. But honestly, I was still dumbfounded by the revelation since we had been together for probably almost a year at that point. I asked her how she could possibly not know all of this, and she said something like, I don't know, it just never comes up. How do you know about it? And to be fair, I couldn't really remember how I knew it. I just can't remember ever not knowing it and had never really considered that other people might not. She was literally a math major at the local university. Story 46. We were in New York City taking a class for a week. On the last day, we all went to a classmate's fancy apartment, overlooking Central Park. I had never been in a place that nice in my life. The classmate was literally neighbors with Steven Spielberg. We were looking out at the incredible view, and she turned to me and said, How much do you think they pay for this place? $1,200 a month? That was an absurdly low number, even in 2005, and she was not joking. Story 47. I once dated a guy who was working as a tree climber and cutter. You need tickets to do this legally. But he was working a dodgy cash-in-hand job with no tickets for some guy. He eventually stopped working for him. He only wanted to be a tree climber and cutter, but still had no tickets. My dad, through his job, knew about a legitimate position for a groundsman. They do the ground grunt work and don't climb the trees to cut them. I suggested he take the job so he could save up and get his tickets. He could have had the tickets in under 12 months. He refused because he only wanted to be a climber. He didn't actively look for any other jobs either, and always complained about not being able to afford the tickets to become a climber. As they say, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. Story 48. I've dated a few idiots over time. I had a boyfriend who knew Counter-Strike values but refused to look them up. He sold something worth over $3,000 for less than $30, which he then spent on The Sims 3 and some DLC during a sale. I had a girlfriend who seriously thought axolotls didn't exist, and she was hostile about it. Then there was another boyfriend who randomly decided that soap was a scam and that he needed to preserve 100% of his skin's natural oils. He also stopped showering. Thankfully, I'm with someone now who's not an idiot. Story 49. My girlfriend of 4 years was dealing with serious stomach and gynecological issues while her brother, who is my age, was dying of stomach cancer. Her father had just passed from stomach cancer, and her mother was undergoing multiple cervical and pelvic surgeries, and she always used the excuse of not having insurance to avoid getting checked. We sat down, talked about budgeting, and made a real effort to get her insurance. The very next day, she spent $1,000 on new iPhones for herself and her 3 daughters, because the new one was out. That was the end. Story 50. You know what? I think I might be an idiot, because this guy told me the Earth was flat, and that no one has ever been to the moon, and I didn't run. Every day it was something dumber. I'm gonna add edits as I remember things. Seeing dog poop gives him an acne breakout. Getting wet outside at all will 100% make him sick every time. That my car broke because it's old. He borrowed it and drove it across town with a minimum of 400 pounds over the payload, and is a piece of crap that because it's an SUV, it's meant to hold tons of weight and that the weight maximums in the manual are a scam. Story 51. We were poor, so I signed him up for a secret MTV game show in New York City. Basically, he was put in a ridiculous situation and had to guess that he was on a hidden camera show. The earlier you guess, the more money you get. It gets more absurd as time goes on. I kept waiting with a producer, and he never guessed. He told me what happened afterward, and it sounded so stupid, even when he was explaining it. When I saw the show air, they didn't even use his clip. I was humiliated because I was sure it was because of how dumb he was. The guy was trying to get a degree in physics and completely lacked all common sense. Story 52. The funny thing is that my boyfriend is extremely smart. He has a degree in mechanical engineering and is working on a master's in chemical engineering, but I'll never forget the time he said it didn't matter that my windshield washer fluid was low because it was going to rain soon, and the rain would refill the reservoir as it flowed down the windshield. Big science guy, not a big car guy. I didn't ask any follow-up questions and just chalked it up to the fact that in his engineer brain, that would be a useful solution to the problem. Maybe he assumed some other engineer already came up with it and implemented it. Story 53. I went out on a double date with a new guy and a friend who was on a first date with another guy. We were doing the getting to know all of us chatting, and my friend was talking about raising goats as a side hustle. Our guys both instantly sat up, looking like a couple of golden retrievers who just heard the word cookies and started excitedly asking weird questions. How fit the goats must be, how much money you can make, where you do it at home, seriously? And then, what do you use sulkies, like with horses? That's when we realized they thought she had racing goats. Like that was an actual sport. Story 54. I had to get to work but didn't have time to eat anything before my 8-hour shift, where I got no breaks because I live in Ohio. So I messaged my boyfriend that I needed him to come get a coupon I had from my mom for Burger King. I wrote on the coupon that I wanted no lettuce, mustard, or ketchup on 2 of the pieces from the entire coupon. It was a 5-piece coupon that would have cost less using the coupon than just buying the 2 items I wanted. He brought me the food and the coupon back, thinking it was just a random piece of paper I gave him with the 2 items I wanted. I was very clear that I wanted him to use the coupon, so I don't know why he only read what I wrote on it and ignored the actual coupon for the meal it was discounting. So now I paid more money for 2 burgers than I would have for the entire meal, don't have any money left for more food, have no drink, and also have to break up with him because why would I have you come get a friggin' coupon if you're not going to use it? Now he's having a child, and this was only about 5 years ago. Story 55. Okay, so this is my cousin, not me, but I have to tell this one. He had been dating this girl for about a year. Super sweet girl and all, but not very bright, despite a normal upbringing and a college education. Apparently, while listening to Mozart, she was confused about how Mozart is with so many different bands. She claimed to like classical music, but she did not know what an orchestra was. She did not know that music was not a new thing. She did not know that Mozart wasn't the one playing any of the music she was hearing. She did not know that Mozart had been dead for a long time. She did not know that music can be written down and that anyone can learn to play it. She literally could not wrap her head around any of it and argued with him when he tried to explain. After she finally understood, her mind was blown. I was skeptical at first, but then she told us about it at a family dinner like she had discovered something profound and was now sharing this amazing revelation. I almost choked. How do you live to be 40 years old, graduate, go to college, have a social life, work with the public, get exposed to all kinds of people from all over, and listen to different kinds of music your whole life, but not know something so fundamental? Story 56. A good girlfriend said to me, Han, do you think he's maybe not that smart? The glass shattered. I remembered all the stupid stuff he'd done over the year we'd been together, got wasted at the wedding we were attending, and dumped him the next day. Stupid stuff he did. Got mad at me for knowing words he didn't know. Got mad when I wanted to hang out with my friends without him. Got mad when I had other things going on like work and couldn't hang out with him. Didn't have a car. In his 30s, in a place you actually need one. Also didn't have a driver's license, but had a very dumb reason why. Sucked up to my friends so much they ended up hating him. Required me to sit and watch him adoringly while he kicked around on guitar. And he wasn't even good. Smoked inside his apartment. There's more, but I'm tired of typing now. He was exhausting. Story 57. She didn't know how to install delay batteries on some decorative lights at age 20. I showed her, and she still didn't understand. At that moment, I knew I couldn't consider a future with her. The last time I talked to her, she told me she couldn't pass her driving exam and had tried over a dozen times before giving up. Honestly, I'm glad I was smart enough to end things before wasting any more of my time. Story 58. She has 2 years of pharmacy school under her belt and considers herself a scientist and a medical professional. She once told me that unflavored sparkling water has calories because the carbon dioxide equals carbs and carbs equal calories. I talked with her for about an hour trying to understand how she came to this conclusion, and apparently it had something to do with carbon atoms from the gas being used to balance pH in the blood during metabolic acidosis, producing carbohydrates as a byproduct. I told her that if we could convert CO2 into food, we would be plants and world hunger would be solved. Another time I said that the sun is a plasma, and she told me I had no idea what I was talking about and that plasma is what's in our blood. I told her plasma has multiple meanings. Yes, there's blood plasma, but there's also plasma as a state of matter. She didn't believe me. Another time, she thought Mars was hellishly hot, probably because it's red, and I'm like, nah, Mars is freezing. She didn't realize it's farther from the sun than Earth, has barely any atmosphere, and is really cold. Most of this I learned in 4th grade, and she constantly throws around her scientist and medical professional title, getting extremely offended whenever anyone disagrees with her scientific or medical opinions. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.